Yes, my name is Carissa Purnell. It's CARISSAPURNELL. I'm just here today as a community member.
Alrighty, so can you explain to us a bit about what's going on today?
Yeah, so we're here today just to show our support and sense of solidarity for the Asian American, Pacific Islander community following the murders and deaths that took place in Atlanta. We really wanted to just unite together as a group, create a healing space to share some resources, a little bit about our local history, and create an open venue for folks in the community to come and talk and heal together.
And can you tell me a little bit about why you decided to choose this space in particular?
Right, so I think one of the things that sometimes we forget is where we came from and the past that brought us to where we're at. And so this specific space was actually a former internment camp. The rodeo grounds housed a bunch of Japanese Americans during internment, and so we wanted to recognize that space. We have some really beautiful local historical markers. We brought out our local Asian community organizations to share a little bit about their role and kind of lifting up this space and remembering all of the people who were here.
I thought one of the very interesting points that you guys were speaking is that these are not just isolated incidents. Can you tell me a little bit about the history about that?
Yeah, I think in most communities of colors, the Asian American Pacific Islander community doesn't fall short out of that narrative. So whether it was the conversations about the Chinese Exclusion Act or voting issues or even here locally with internment, crime in the Asian community has been on an uptick, especially following the pandemic and sort of the narrative that's been wrapped around the Asian community. So we reached out to local organizations out in San Francisco from Stop Asian American, AAPI Hate. So they gave us some pamphlets and some information about how to report it and how to be proactive in the instance where hate does come up.
And can you tell me about the different organizations that are here today?
Yeah, so I had put out a call and said, hey, I want to create this space to kind of bring together resources. And so we have everyone from the Asian community experience, the Filipino community centers here, the Buddhist temple came and set up a beautiful Buddhism altar for their families. And then we also have organizations from schools from CSUMB to our elected officials who showed up to be supportive of today's event.
Have you yourself experienced any xenophobia or racism?
So I think being the daughter of a Filipino immigrant, I got to watch my mom do it from a distance. So because I'm biracial, I never experienced things to the extent that my mom did. And so one of the reasons that I'm here as the next generation, as people who are coming up, is to protect our elders, is to stand up for those folks who feel like they can't, right? So I think that there's a culture of silence and a little bit of hesitation to speak up. And so I think as young people, it's our responsibility to protect our elders and protect people who are older than us in times like this.
And why do you think it's so important to hold rallies like this? Even just sharing, just culture, it's not just cultural rallies, it's just sharing information.
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest problems that people in general have is when you hurt and when you suffer, you feel like you hurt and suffer alone, but that's not the case. So if you look around, there's people of different genders, ethnicities, and backgrounds, and they're all here to share space and solidarity and support. So we have mental health care resources, local community organizations. So if folks ever feel alone or they need to plug in somewhere, we've got everything so they can feel empowered and not feel alone.
How big is the Asian community here in Monterey, or even in Salinas in general?
I actually don't know, but Jason can give you a better number. I don't want to give you wrong information yet.
So is there anything else that you would like to add or say to the public that you feel that I missed?
Yeah, so we've created a local Asian AAPI business directory. So folks who have businesses here who want to put up a poster or want to join the directory, just let us know. They can reach out to me. I'll share my information with you. But we just want to create as much community as we can around this issue. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Carissa, and I just wanted to thank you for coming out. This was sort of let's gather because we're hurting kind of a response to some things that took place in Atlanta, who we all saw the loss of life. We just really wanted to create a space to see one another, to heal together as a community, and invite some of the local folks who've been doing this work for a generation. So just a little land acknowledgement. We are here on Ohlone land, so thank you to them for allowing us to be in this space. Thank you to our elders and leaders, the Buddhist temple who have come out, ACE who's come out to really support this event. I'm the daughter of a Filipino immigrant, and this is just here for my mom, right? I'm here to stand in solidarity with my mom because I was raised to sort of sit back and be quiet, but the American in me is not going to allow that to happen, right? So I think we're warriors and we're fighters in the way that we know how to be, and this is the way that I know how to do it, by creating community and creating space. So I had put a call out, and as soon as I did, there was this huge surge in support, so it meant a lot to me personally, and it meant a lot for the community. And one of those people who I met is Jason, who's standing here with me. I'm a graduate of San Francisco State University and had the privilege of working under Allison Cubales, who runs AAPI Educational Partnerships out in San Francisco, who also coincidentally is Jason's master's thesis dissertation chair as well. So we talk about community, what it looks like, and this is kind of what it looks like, right? So I'm going to pass it off to him to share a little bit about why we're here, and specifically why we're here in this space, and some of the team that he brought with him here today.
It's been a while since I've done public speaking. I'm actually born and raised here in Salinas, California, but as Carissa mentioned, I actually did some time up in San Francisco. So a little background about myself. Once again, my name is Jason Galinado Wakpawa. I'm Filipino-American. I identify as Filipino-American, born and raised in Salinas, California. I went to school out here. So I went to Natividad Elementary, for those who went to Natividad. I went to La Jolla Elementary, for those who went to La Jolla. I went to Galvan View Middle School, so if you're a Hawks fan, I went to Galvan View. And also I'm a class of 2006 from North Salinas High School. Go Vikings. But then after I graduated from high school, I spent the last 10 years in San Francisco, and that's where I kind of figured out how to get involved with Asian American Studies. So I got involved with Ethnic Studies, the College of Ethnic Studies at San Francisco State, and that's where I started learning about the history of not just Filipinos in America, but the communities and ethnicities that kind of comprise of Asian American Studies. Japanese, Chinese, Filipinos, which were the original kind of immigrants to this country. There's also Koreans, Southeast Asians, and then folks that came post-1965, which is kind of like the community that we're kind of in right now, dealing with what life is like in a post-1965 generation era. And although we've experienced a lot of the hate crimes we see in the media nowadays, I've learned through the College of Ethnic Studies that these incidences aren't just one-off. They've been happening for over centuries. The 150-year history of Asians in America has been about dealing with race, racism, classism, and different other oppressive factors that kind of dominate the community. To kind of add on, I'm also part of ACE, which is a table on this side, Asian Cultural Experience, as well as FANS, Filipino American National Historical Society. So this kind of whatever I learned in San Francisco kind of helped galvanize me to come back to my own community, come back to my hometown of Salinas, and bring this back, get a better understanding of the history of Asians in our community. And I feel like it's kind of a blessing in disguise. Through the trauma and through the hate that we've been experiencing, it's also trying to find ways to kind of get back together as a community and try and find ways where we can come back together and seek a better future. We've witnessed and experienced all these crimes that are happening, but what we're trying to do is try and fight for a better future in our community. The Asian American community in Salinas is small. It's only about 5% in this town. But over 100 years ago, they dominated the entire city. We had a Chinatown for the community. Chinatown is now mostly used as a space for the marginalized to kind of find community within themselves. Now it's not predominantly Chinese or Japanese or Filipino. But it's home to the marginalized, the homeless, the folks who are kind of encamped around this area and who've come in and out of the area. So when you think of Chinatowns, it's not just kind of dealing with Asians and Americans, but it's also the history of marginalized folks in the community. I kind of don't know where I went with that, but I'm just rambling about why we're here. But we're here to show support. At the end of the day, it's knowing that we're not isolated folks. History has shown that Asians in America and this community has been kind of isolated. But the fact that you guys are here today, you could be anywhere in the world, but you decide to show up and show your support. It kind of shows that this community is here, and Salinas is here for the community. So I hope that this is not just a one-off event, but something that can kind of expand into the future. Something that we can kind of do moving on forward is how can we support not just the Asian Ham community, but how can we support the marginalized communities of the Monterey County and Salinas? So with that, I mean, once again, I just want to thank you all for coming here. I mean, this wouldn't have been possible if it wasn't for Carissa. I mean, I kind of found out through the event through her. And I mean, just the support from like ACE as well as Fonz, the different organizations who are here tabling as well too. I mean, this is the chance to kind of get to know about the folks in the community and understand where we're coming from. So I mean,
Check. All right. Thank you, Jason, and thank you, Carissa, and thank you all for being here today. Yeah, and also thank you to our houseless neighbors here for allowing us to occupy their space as well. Just wanted to give a shout out to everybody there. I wrote some notes down here, and Carissa and Jason mentioned this a little bit already in terms of why we're here today is coming together to build community. And also find some healing, right? And so at the root of those words, more than words, what I see is, actions and verbs is solidarity and love, and that's kind of the two things that I want to meditate on today. The other end of that spectrum is what I see as division and hate, right? And those things feed into one another, right? But if love inspires solidarity and vice versa, right? Solidarity inspires love. So let's talk a little bit about what that means, and it goes beyond when I say recognizing and the recognition and acknowledgement of people who are different than you, right? But rather a deep and fundamental understanding that our liberations are tied together, right? Your liberation is tied to mine. That is how I define solidarity. So, and to understand that, we need to see connections between the headlines that we see every day, as well as the histories that are untold. We need to see the connections between the violent rhetoric that comes from the state, as well as vigilante violence, right? That's perpetuated by this rhetoric. And also the connection between all our struggles, right? The intersectionality of our movements, as well as the privileges that we hold on to even as oppressed peoples, and how we can utilize those privileges to uplift other marginalized communities, or most marginalized, and center them in our movements. So Jason talked a little bit about history, right? How these are not isolated incidents, right? There's definitely been an uptick in hate crimes against our Asian American communities, particularly our elders, but there's a long history dating back to the 1800s. Influx of Chinese Americans, we see them as we know, like, they built our railroads. That's what we're taught, right? But really, it wasn't just Chinese Americans. In the South, enslaved Africans, as well as in the Southwest. We had native peoples in the Southwest region, as well as folks from Mexico and our Latinx brothers and sisters and other genders building these railroads. So when we talk about the exploitation of importing labor, right? Exploitable labor. So we have to realize that this is how we're connected, right? With our BIPOC, our Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, right? So the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 really relegated folks in Angel Island up in San Francisco. We're mentioning that. People in months, years even, detained in these prisons. Carving poetry and their names on the walls and their stories. It's the same struggle that we see from folks, our relatives from Central America coming up. Folks from China in the 1800s were fleeing from the opioid war, and as well as famine and drought in their home countries. And the same folks from Central America, Honduras, Ecuador, El Salvador, are fleeing U.S. imperialism. Right? These multinational corporations coming in, appropriating their land and resources and labor, and then they come here seeking refuge. Climate change as well, climate-driven catastrophes brought about by these multinational corporations. So they're knocking at our doorsteps, and we're saying our borders are closed. So we have to understand that the immigrant experience, whether forced or chosen, or forced through circumstance, is different and unique for all of our communities, and it's also the same. And these two truths, we have to hold close in our hearts and understand them deeply. So now, when we talk about these histories, they don't want us to understand and know. They don't want us to know that in Delano, California, Latinx, and Filipino farm workers stood in circles like these, right? And because there was a language barrier, it's during the grape strike in the 60s, right? Folks would clap their hands slowly together, and then they'd go faster and faster and faster, and they'd really, to symbolize our heartbeat and the building of the momentum of our movement. And they'd end with, say, Isang Baksak, which means one rise, one fall. It's united together, or we fall together. They don't want us to know that Black Panthers read Mao, and then that in China, they stood for the Black Liberation Movement. They don't want us to know that the Third World Liberation Front, the Asian American students from San Francisco and Berkeley, stood in front of the Oakland jails and free Huey, right? Yellow Peril for supports Black Power, right? So all these intersectionalities and crossroads of our movements is really important for us to understand. So when we really talk about solidarity and love, it's really all that this struggle comes from, and how we build the movement together. Because when we talk about the connection, I mentioned this before, between the rhetoric of the state and also vigilante violence on the ground in our communities, it's an important parallel to draw, right? Trump said the China flu or the China virus, right? And we saw a huge uptick in hate against Asian Americans. Biden and Tony Blinken, there's still a lot of Asian American international anti-Asian sentiment, like really villainizing China and things like that, and gathering our allies in the Pacific to go against China, and we're still seeing that today, so we can't separate these two things, and really it's about not asking, it's like, how do we protect each other, right? Because we know that violence also comes from the state, and that more policing doesn't necessarily mean safer communities, right? As a matter of fact, they disproportionately target our Latinx and Black relatives, right? So, if we say, oh, we want more protection for our Asian American elders, what does that look like? It's we protect each other, right? Coming into our communities, speaking out against these ideologies of hate and villainization and the othering of all our communities, not just ours, right? But those who are also targets of that hate speech, because that hate speech turns into action. I wanted to not get away from who we're gathered here today, and I did gather some. I think it's really important for us to understand who the folks are who have fallen victim to this violence, and not kind of lose sight and use this moment of their the last moments of where they face violence to define their lives. So I just wanted to share a couple words about some of those folks that we're here to honor today. So Huyen Jong Grant, 51. Her son Robert recalls she spent her whole life just existing for her brother and I. She never had the time to travel. She would only be home a certain amount of days every few weeks. The rest of the family was in Korea, and she was a single mother raising her two sons. Da Yao Feng, 44, started working for Miss Tan at Young's Massage only a few months before the shooting. Fred remembers her as a kind and quiet soul. Deliana Ashley Yuan Gonzalez, she was on a date with her husband. She married in August, mother of a 14-year-old son and 9-month-old daughter. She worked at the Waffle House a few doors down from the spa. Sun Cha Kim, 69, worked at Gold Spa, and in her spare time she enjoyed line dancing. A grandmother married for more than 50 years, she immigrated from Korea to the U.S. to provide for better life and education for her family. Young Ai Yui, born in South Korea, she met her husband Mac Peterson, who was stationed in the U.S. Army, and they moved to the U.S. in the 1970s. They divorced in 1982. She had 2 sons, and both of their families remained close. She worked at the aromatherapy spa across the street from Gold Gold Spa. She used to take Peterson's sister to Gold Spa. And the reason why I share these details about these folks' lives, because I think it's important to see them as whole people and not just victims to this violence, as we center them in our movement and our work to build a community, to build our power, right, to protect each other. So just want to thank you all for being here again today. Yeah.
I promise we'll stop talking soon. I wanted to acknowledge too that we've made contact with some organizers in Atlanta, so we would like to write a card or send your condolences to the families. We've got a little station over here, and you can write letters, send your condolences, and there's information about the organization that we're working with in Atlanta. And then I'm going to pass the final word to Supervisor Luisa Nicole. If he doesn't want to start.
Thank you everybody for coming today. First of all, I want to thank the organizers for bringing us together for this gathering against hate and violence against the AAPI community. So I want to first acknowledge all of you, and certainly I want to acknowledge the Asian cultural experience for uplifting the cultures and celebrations of Asian American communities in Monterey County, especially here in Salinas for years now. So I really want to acknowledge all the work they do. I saw Larry Hirahara and others, the leaders of our local community, so thank you very much. I just wanted to also thank MP Monterey Peninsula School Board member Jeff Uchida for standing with us here today, Orlando Osorio, City Council member of Salinas, and District Attorney Janine Pacioni, who also joined me, and I think Robert Rios' office, his staff, will help with today's event. I just wanted to really quickly read a statement that I didn't intend to speak. I was just going to post a solidarity statement with the API American community here in Monterey County. It says, dear brothers and sisters, I stand here today not only as a Monterey County supervisor, but as a proud resident of Salinas and someone who believes in standing against hate, violence, bigotry, and racism. We know that to be anti-racist means that we cannot be silent. Rather, we must lift our voices and fight racism whenever or wherever it may be. We also know that an injustice to one is an injustice to us all. And today I stand with my API American brothers and sisters to denounce and condemn the deeply embedded sickness throughout U.S. history of racism, violence, and unjust laws against the API American community. Locally, it was once the Chinese Exclusion Act, or the anti-miscegenation laws, or the Watsonville anti-Filipino riots right in my own hometown, or Executive Order 9066 that unjustly stripped the civil rights and civil liberties of over 120,000 Japanese Americans, thousands who were interned right here, right on this property for months during that time. Today, we may be from different communities, but we must be as one in standing against intolerance, hate crimes, and violence. I'm proud that Monterey County was the first in California to unanimously approve a resolution stating just that. And I'm also proud that Governor Newsom also recently appointed Rob Bonta as the first Filipino American in California history as the Attorney General of the state of California, the highest law enforcement leader in our state at this critical time. I want to thank Dr. Carissa Purnell and all the organizers who brought us here today. And as Dr. King once said, in the end, we will not remember the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. We are Salinas, and we stand for justice. Thank you very much.
There's plenty of hand sanitizer, stop by the Aces table, the Buddhist temple area. There's water if you need it. We also, have some lunches for unhoused folks if you want to make friends on your way out.
I just wanted to try one more thing. So Nick actually mentioned it earlier, with the unity clap. So as we end our kind of conversation for the day, and allow y'all to kind of like walk around, socialize, and kind of get a chance to know everybody in the space, I actually wanted to try the unity clap. So how it starts, watch first, and then we'll try it together. So it starts off slow, and then it speeds up. And then you'll hear Sang Bagsak, we'll all clap together. You'll hear Dalawang Bagsak, we'll clap twice. Then you'll hear Tatlong Bagsak, which means 1, 2, 3. Now the first clap represents the past. So the things that have happened in the past are all gone, but we have to remember them. The second clap represents the present. So we understand what had happened in the past is affecting us today. And the third clap that actually represents the future.
so that we try and push forward to a more unified, peaceful kind of like unified society. So y'all ready to try it? Cool. Not long back suck. Not long back suck. Thank you. Woo.